to today's edition of Hope and Help for Families in West Virginia. My name is Reverend Matthew J. Watts, and I'm here today with my co-host, Ms. Christy Day. And we're going to be continuing our discussion today on minority youth in the juvenile justice system in West Virginia. We discussed this topic last time, and we talked primarily about the problem, trying to define the problem. And today we'll continue our discussion as we look at some of the solutions that we should be entertaining to address this issue of the overrepresentation of minorities in the juvenile justice system in West Virginia. Christy, welcome again to the program.
Thank you very much. We did start what was definitely an intriguing conversation. People have stopped me on the streets and said that was very informative what we talked about, and a lot of people just don't know about what's happening in our state. Something, for example, that people don't know is that while African Americans only represent 4% of the state's juvenile population, there are 18% of those who are in detention, there's 17% of those who are in correctional facilities, and in Charleston alone, they are about, I think, 52% of those who are in these same kind of systems.
Yes, and that is alarming, and it should be of concern to all of us around the state, not only those in the African American community, but people in West Virginia in general. When you see an overrepresentation of any group of young people in our criminal justice system, that speaks to a problem that we need to address, and it's going to require, I think, a holistic response from various segments of our community if we're going to address it adequately. We all talk about children, being our future, but children are our children while they're our children. And if we don't bring them through childhood to where they become educated, trained, so they can grow to be mature parents, functioning adults, contributing members of our society, then our society will be weakened over time. And that's why we need to address this issue very aggressively.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing some of that now. I mean, people are literally afraid of young people in their communities. I mean, when we were coming up, if you were doing something wrong, you expected the lady next door to correct you and then tell your mom and your daddy that she did it. Now, folks are afraid of children to a large extent.
And that's unfortunate because the overwhelming majority of our young people in West Virginia are doing extremely well. They're going to school, they're making good grades, they're participating in extracurricular activities, they're engaged in community service, they're growing to be mature, functioning young people. But unfortunately, the media often will use stereotypes, and it will over-dramatize the plight of young people. So people will conclude that all young people are involved in juvenile delinquent type of activity and should be feared, and that's far from the case. However, we must recognize that we do have far too many young people that are getting involved in the juvenile justice system, and so it does warrant our aggressive response.
Yeah, and last week we talked a lot about these problems, and some may think that it's all doom and gloom, but you're here to tell folks that there are some avenues that could effectively tackle and correct some of these problems.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that we should be concerned. We need to look at this matter seriously, but we should not become overly pessimistic. There's reason to have optimism. There are a lot of positive things that are taking place with young people, and we just need to provide more opportunities for the young people that are at risk. As we talked about last time, one of the reasons we think that there's an overrepresentation of minority youth, particularly African American youth, in the juvenile justice system is because African Americans live in concentrated areas. Over 80% of the African American population lives in about a 10-county area in the state, and almost a third of all blacks in the state of West Virginia live in Kanawha County, which a significant percentage of them living in the Charleston community. And Charleston has an urban feel and flavor to it, as does Huntington, as does Beckley, and all three of those cities have a significant overrepresentation of minority youth in the system. And in an urban type city environment, there's going to be higher crime in communities. There's going to be more police presence in those communities. Therefore, the police surveillance in communities will result in youth who are involved in criminal activity being arrested more readily than they would be arrested if they were in a rural or a more suburban type of community, and therefore if you have a larger influx into the system. And so that's one of the areas I think we have to look at. How do we provide some more structured activities for young people to fill in some of the free time that they have? There's a misnomer that most juvenile crime happens late at night. Most juvenile crime happens between the hours of about 3 o'clock and 8 o'clock, those unsupervised hours right after school. So building more after-school recreational programs, structured educational programs, and creating opportunities for some of these young people who may not be involved in the regular extracurriculars like the band or football, basketball, track, or something like that. See if we can't get them into some activities, thereby filling in that free time with some productive activity and hopefully diverting them from what could be juvenile delinquent activity.
Because what we hear most about, and perhaps it's because it's the most devastating, is our young people being involved in drug trafficking and in various communities. But they, I guess in the scheme of things, they are only a portion, and I don't know, venture to say a small portion of the kinds of problems that we're seeing with children.
I would think that in some communities, I would dare to say that probably in the more urban communities, you're probably seeing more young African-American youth involved in the illegal sale of drugs. I mean, it is becoming part of the economy, and we talked about that last time, how the drug traffic has now become inextricably woven into the fabric of our economy. And so, as illegitimate as it might be, it's an easy way for a young person to get into the economy and to make money. So what we have to do, starting with parents, we've got to help young people develop a healthy work ethic, to understand that there is dignity in laboring with your hands or with your mind or with your feet. There's dignity in working and earning a wage and contributing back to society, that all labor is dignified, whether it's working on the trash truck or whether it's working on the computer terminal. There's no labor, there's no work that, if it's legal and if it's contributing to society, it's a worthwhile effort. And we need to emphasize it to young people again. And by creating maybe opportunities for them to be employed within the community, running errands. When I was a youth growing up in rural West Virginia, all the lawns were cut by the youth, all the grass, all the leaves were raked, the snow was shoveled by young people. And there were other jobs that the community created for the young people because they knew that we needed to learn to do things and we needed to be productive. And we got to look at doing things like that again. There's no replacement from parental involvement. I mean, all of the social scientists, all the experts say that the parents are the primary educators of their children. And so we as parents must take on that responsibility for the nurture of our children, for instructing them in moral values, to challenge them to be young people of character and integrity. And the best way we can do that is model it out before them so they can see what it is to be a person of integrity and honesty and a law-abiding citizen. And so I cannot overstate the importance of parents and of extended family to help to nurture the character of our youth.
How realistic is it, though, that you take a young person, and I know we're getting onto some of these solutions, and so that's what I really want you to talk about, but how is it that someone who's making $500, $600, a week or a day selling drugs, that you can say, turn your back on that lifestyle and earn minimum wage over here doing something, in one of these other legal professions?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to be honest with the young people and say there's no economic argument that I can make to you. If you are a pure capitalist with no morality, then I cannot make an economic argument as to why you should go to McDonald's and work for minimum wage or some other minimum wage jobs versus going for the big easy money on the streets. But there are some logical arguments, and more importantly, there's a moral argument to be made. What I tell young people is that you are created in the image of God, and you have intrinsic value and worth, and there's something that you have that you can contribute to society that no one else can contribute. There's no one like you, no one with your personality, no one with the combination of experiences and skills that you have. There's something that you have to offer, and I believe it's more than polluting the community by selling drugs on the street corner. I don't believe that your life was only for you to do that. So I start there with young people. And then I try to help them to realize that when you do illegal things in the community, for example, selling drugs, then it's not a very wise or enlightened thing to do, because drug traffic creates a certain instability, it attracts violence and guns and weapons, and so you actually create a more hostile environment in which you yourself have to live. And I said that would be almost like if you were to go upstream from a water source that you had to drink from and pollute the water upstream and come back downstream and draw water from it to drink. I try to get them to see the negative consequences to the community, to the society, how it affects their families. And they're not talking specifically about the fact you're going to get caught. In a place like West Virginia or Charleston, if you sell drugs long enough, you are going to get caught at it. And once you turn 18, you can become a convicted felon, meaning that you cannot go in the military, you cannot work for certain parts of the government, there's certain people that won't employ you, there's certain benefits that you forfeit, including the right of enfranchisement, the right to vote. So I try to really lay the picture out to them to where they can see the whole piece and say, here's an opportunity, you can get an education. You can go to vocational technical education school, go into the military. You can get a skill and you don't have to look over your shoulder every 5 or 10 minutes. You don't have to wonder when the police is coming to get you or some drug dealer is going to take you out. So we try to tell them the truth about the whole drug economy. And one thing I will say to them with a bit of humor, I say, well, do you see any drug dealers drawing Social Security or drawing a pension? No. The drug lives normally are interrupted with violence, with death, or incarceration. And so we try to make that appeal to them and then try to provide them with viable alternatives to where they can access education and employment opportunities.
So when we're talking about the overrepresentation of African Americans in the juvenile justice system, of course some of the responsibility is to stay out of trouble, but then there's also another part of this, which is how as a community do we look at resolving this problem too?
Exactly. I believe that first and foremost, people make choices and decisions and they create certain consequences for themselves. So I think the burden rests back with the individual, making the right choices, choosing not to get involved in illegal activity, choosing not to get involved in selling drugs, choosing not, in my opinion, I hope they refrain from tobacco and alcohol and so forth, making right choices. That's very important. Then we talked earlier about the importance of family, encouraging kids to stay in school, supporting their academic efforts, supporting them in extracurricular activities, trying to surround them with positive people that's going to give them encouragement and expose them to people who can serve as genuine role models, not some distant athlete or entertainer, but someone who lives in the neighborhood, who lives in the community, that are doing the type of things you want to see the young people to do. And then I think we've got to look at the fact that crime and unemployment and poverty, they normally keep company together. In our state, we're primarily incarcerating poor people, and that's the case around the country, because very often the pressures the poor people are dealing with, the lack of employment and economic opportunity, they don't see viable options and alternatives. And so I think we have to look at how do we create more employment opportunities in the communities that have the highest crime rate. I'll give you a good example. On last week, the Bureau of Employment Programs issued the labor statistics. If memory serves me correctly, the unemployment rate in West Virginia was less than 5%, the lowest it has been in 30 years since they've been keeping the statistics. So the economy is doing extremely well for some. At the same time, the unemployment rate in the African American community is probably around 12 to 15%. And for African American youth, it's well over 50%. And so even though certain pockets of the economy might be going well and there are employment opportunities, in other segments they are not. And historically, what we find is there is a significantly higher unemployment rate within the black community. And so we've got to look at how do we create more employment opportunities for the adults and for the youth. And so small business development, entrepreneurship development, companies looking at maybe putting offices, within those communities. I've asked some of the people here in Charleston that a lot of the businesses are going out to the Northgate Business Park or the Cross Lane or the Corridor G. I said, well, the highest crime rates in Charleston is the east side and the west side. Why can't we get more businesses to put jobs there so they'd be closer and accessible to the community? So that's a part, I think, of this equation of trying to address the economic woes that affect the black community in West Virginia.
I'm curious, what's the response you get from those businesses when you make that kind of a passionate plea?
Well, they listen. Unfortunately, I've not gotten a taker yet, but I think the more we talk about it, the more reasonable, and I think it's gaining some momentum because people are at least saying, well, maybe there is some logic to this, and so we will continue to articulate that position until we get someone to respond.
Now, and when we talk about these things, and we try to, of course, break it down as simplistically as possible, but the fact of the matter is, if a community does not take ownership of this problem, then the community has to deal with the fallout of the problem. That means your communities aren't as safe. You may have a wonderful car and you may not deal with these people on a regular basis, but you could very easily get carjacked on your way from point A to point B. Your children, your school system, all of this is interconnected.
That's correct. And that is a very difficult question to respond to and to answer. But I'm going to try to articulate a response. But I'm going to gather myself before I do that. And we're going to take just a brief break. And when we come back, we'll talk more specifically about what the community needs to do and why it's in their vested interest to respond to this problem of juvenile overrepresentation in the criminal justice system.
One of the reasons lions roar is to warn threatening bachelor males from other prides to stay away from their young. Here, a lion cub gets a lesson in proper roaring from its father. Teaching this behavior is not just crucial to the pride, but also to the survival of the species. Just a reminder how important it is for fathers to spend time with their children.
Welcome back to Hope and Helpful Families in West Virginia. If you just tuned in, my name is Reverend Matthew J. Watts. I'm here today with my co-host, Mrs. Christy Day, and we're talking about the overrepresentation of minorities in the juvenile justice system in West Virginia.
We were talking a little bit before we left about the importance and the role that the community plays in taking ownership of this problem and why it is a community problem.
Well, it's a community problem because most crimes that juveniles commit, they commit them in the community where they live. It's a community problem because the children committing the crimes are from the community. They're someone's children. And so we are we're impacted by juvenile crime, and it's mothers and fathers and grandmothers whose hearts are broken when they see their young people go into the system. So there is a responsibility. We cannot abdicate the responsibility and expect someone somewhere else to solve it. What we expect from government is we expect resources, and what we expect from the business community is maybe some opportunities for employment and from other groups. But the community must take ownership of the problem. As we said earlier, parents must be the champion for their children. They must be advocating for their children to get the highest quality of education as they possibly can see them to get. We must provide more supervision for our children. We must know who their friends are and where they're going and who they're hanging out with. Those are things we must do. There's a role the faith community needs to play. Historically, the church has been the social anchor for the African American community. It has sort of been the bedrock for moral values and spiritual values, connecting people with a transcendent value system. And so we must exert ourselves as the community of faith. There was a study done by Johns Hopkins University a few years ago in the inner city of Baltimore and in Washington, D.C. And they looked at kids from the same communities, some who were involved in local churches and religious groups on a regular basis, others who weren't. And as best they could, balancing all factors being equal, those youth that were involved consistently in Sunday school or synagogue, they consistently performed higher academically. They were much less likely to end up in the juvenile justice system, and they were much less likely to become a teenage parent. And so we know that there is a role that the community of faith plays. We've got to develop a strategy once again to connect with young people. Young people don't come to the community of faith like they used to. And so we've got to change our model to how we go to the community and reach the young people and connect them back with the faith community, where you have the people who are hard-working, law-abiding citizens who have high expectations for you and who can provide nurture and mentoring for them. We must bring the resources together that we have, and we do have tremendous resources in terms of physical facilities with our churches and other community-based groups. We have financial capital in terms of the resources that we have, and more importantly, we have intellectual capital and capacity and spiritual capital and capacity, and developing this in a system and saying that we are going to try to create a youth development system for our youth is an imperative for us as a community.
We get so caught up in our own daily lives, you know, paying the bills, taking care of our own children, that a lot of times we just forget that we do have responsibility to get involved in schools, to act as mentors, and to support businesses that we see supporting some of these things which we believe in. And one of the nonprofits that's supporting what we're talking about here is the Hope Community Development Corporation, and they're definitely going, or you're definitely going about this in a very systematic way of tackling this problem, addressing it, and trying to get to some of the root causes of it.
That's correct. The Hope Community Development Corporation is a nonprofit that we established back in 1996 with the mission of trying to help families and youth and poor communities develop through the development and implementation of programs that promote education, employment training, economic development, and spiritual renewal. And we're pleased to announce that we were recently selected by the Kanawha County Workforce Investment Board, which works under the state board, to be the service provider. And what that means, that under the new legislation, the Workforce Investment Act of 1998, communities now have to develop comprehensive, holistic youth development systems. In the past, we had basically a summer youth program where youth were assigned to various nonprofit organizations, community groups. They worked for the summer and they earned a stipend. Now we have to provide them with the summer initiative, but we also have to provide ongoing 12 months of service, which will include tutoring and mentoring, career awareness, college preparation, support for youth who may be pregnant or a parent. And one of the groups that's targeted for the Workforce Investment Act youth development piece are youth that are either on probation, coming out of incarceration, or in the juvenile justice system. And so the idea would be now the court and the probation departments and others who are working with this population can refer them into this youth development system. And if they are eligible based on the criteria, then they can receive services all year round. And we're really excited about that.
I know you've already started that process. Tell me, what is some of the reaction you're getting from these young people and from their parents?
Well, from the young people, it's been tremendous. Here in Kanawha County, we got started a little bit late, and I would like to point out the fact this is not just a Kanawha County initiative. This is a statewide initiative. The state is broken into 7 regions, and Kanawha County is in Region 3. And all around the state, these local workforce investment boards, they implemented their summer component for the youth. And most of the summer components had a paid component to it, and others had a community service type, and they received a stipend. And so we now, around the state, will be implementing our follow-up to that with the services. And in Kanawha County, we had 120 youth because we got started late, but with a cross-section from all over the county, and with a tremendous response. The young people really, they responded to it. They were assigned to their work locations. Most of them received very good performance evaluations on their employment. They genuinely appeared to be excited about the fact that they're going to receive follow-up services year-round to assist them to be successful academically and socially. And so we're excited about it, and we think that this new youth development system under the Workforce Investment Act has a tremendous potential to help young people, particularly this group of at-risk youth that often find themselves on the wrong side of the law.
Do you have any, I guess, benchmarks that are in place that you say this time next year, this is what we want to see? Things that really tell you that you are getting to the root of this problem and you are working through it?
Well, we have several. I mean, our organization, like most nonprofits, are fledgling little groups who are trying to tap into different funding sources to get enough resources to operate. So we have several different grant sources, and so we have performance criteria that we must meet for each grant. With the Workforce Investment Act funds, we have to do what's called an individual service strategy. So we must sit down within the next month with every youth that's in our program and develop an individual service strategy to determine what it's going to take for this young person to be successful for the next year. And so we'll be looking at their academic performance, their school attendance, whether or not they're having disciplinary referrals, and expulsions, suspensions, et cetera, and whether or not they get involved in the juvenile justice system. We have another small grant through the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Department where we're working with status offenders. Mm-hmm. These are young people who maybe are incorrigible, they've run away from home, they've been truant from school, and they're not formally in the system, but they've been referred to the Department of Health and Human Services, and then they are referring them to us. And so we've had the initial meetings with the Department of Health and Human Services. We're excited about this opportunity because it gives us an opportunity to work with youth before they progress into some of the more serious crimes. And so we think we have an opportunity there if we can demonstrate that the status offenders that we work with, if the majority of them don't progress, but end up staying in school, making good marks, and having good attendance, we will consider that to be a success. And so in work with the young people, that's sort of the criteria that we're using. We think that over the long haul, to break the cycle of crime, you've got to get young people educated. You've got to put skills in their hands. You got to prepare them for this new millennium, the sophisticated workforce. And so they got to be prepared for some type of post-secondary education, whether it be college, whether it be vocational technical education, whether it's the military, Job Corps. There are a lot of opportunities out there. But preparing them along the way so they know that the opportunities are there, and if they're prepared to take advantage of them once they get to that age. And so we think that the Workforce Investment Act and these youth development programs gives us an opportunity to do a lot of that.
And I'm sure that you can always use willing volunteers to come in and help with those efforts.
Always. The bottom line, this is a issue that deals with relationships. People are impacted through relationships. And I think that one of the problems that a lot of young people have today, not just young people who are caught up in the juvenile justice system, there are young people who are having problems with drugs and out-of-wedlock pregnancies, and teenage suicide is on the increase. Young people are disconnected. They seem to be alienated in a lot of cases from positive adult input into their lives. And so we're always looking for volunteers to serve as mentors, as tutors. I call it trying to create as many positive encounters with as many positive adults as I can for young people. And somewhere along the way, they will connect with someone. Somewhere they'll meet someone they can relate to, and they can see themselves being like that person, as a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, as a banker, as a school teacher, as a probation officer, as a social worker. They can see themselves because they can relate to this individual. And once you can see yourself becoming something, then there's a motivation for you to try to apply yourself to develop.
Since 1996, what are some of the positives that, since you began this journey, I'm sure it began long before 1996, but with hope, what are some of the things that you can share with folks that have been positive?
Well, we've been able to help a number of young people in terms of get on the right track, to keep them focused where they were able to complete their probation and go on with a meaningful life. We have young people we work with today that are in college. We have young people that actually graduated from college. We've probably helped well over 150 people find employment, both youth and adults, through our employment referral program, and we're really excited about that opportunity to serve. We've got about 300 youth that's currently in our youth development system from elementary through college that we're either tutoring, mentoring, or providing some service to. And it's always a work in progress, but we're excited about what we've accomplished.
Well, that's wonderful. So creating those positive encounters will definitely get to the heart of this overpopulation, overrepresentation of African Americans, particularly in juvenile justice.
We think so. Thank you. Thanks again for tuning in for Hope and Helpful Families. We'll see you again next time.